Alright everybody, welcome in. Let's play some chess. So we're going to start off with our ready opening. This is the knight opening. The idea is that it gives us some flexibility. We can play whatever we want. I like to go with a fianchetto whenever possible. Okay, so this is something I'm trying out lately. This is this early c4 push. It's not something that I've got a lot of experience in. The idea is that it's very similar to like a Queen's Gambit type line, but this is a true ready. And now the idea here is I don't need to do anything with this pawn. There's really no reason for me to attack it right away, to try to block it. This is one way to attack it. This queen up here on c2 works fine. I'm going to probably look at fianchettoing my dark square bishop if possible. That's not always possible. You could immediately go for the pawn with something like this. Notice queen to a4 comes with check. And so you could go for something like that right away. I don't see the need to do it. I'm not really going to worry about it. I'm going to let my opponent try to figure out if they're going to try to save it. And by trying to save that pawn, it could end up putting them in more trouble than if they had just played normally. So in this case, he is not going to save the pawn. So I'm going to go ahead and grab. And now there is a danger zone. Okay. That would have come with check and picked up that piece at the end of the day. Now my opponent would have had to simply retreat, but that's okay. Now my opponent on having doubled f-pawns is not the end of the world. I'm going to still go for the fianchetto probably. I just got to make sure that I'm not missing out on any opportunities. Now my opponent is stopping the checks, which is what they want to be doing. Let's just keep developing. Let's continue with our plan to develop here. This pawn is not going to be a problem. In fact, it's going to be a benefit because I'm going to use that to just kind of push down the board and use it to open things up for my attack in the future. Now we've released the dark square bishop. I'm just trying to keep an eye on things to make sure I don't drop anything because I've had a habit of doing that lately. You'll notice my rating has dropped 1594. I've had some bad games lately. Don't know if you can tell by my voice, but I had a slight infection, and that caused me to not be able to record games for a while. And as such, I've just been playing games on my phone, whenever I had the chance, just sitting at home and sitting on the couch. And I've been making some major blunders that I'm not a fan of. Just trying to decide where to retreat my queen. The c2 square is always a good place for it to go. I'm just debating now if I want to plop it here on either b3 or maybe e2. I'm going to rule out b3 because I'm still long range thinking about a fianchetto of my dark square bishop. So it's either one of these two moves that I'm debating on right now. I don't really see a difference in them other than the fact that I know that my rook wants to come under here. It's possible my opponent is looking to castle queenside, but you notice that my opponent has taken away any options of me stopping that. Right? Even if I have control of this diagonal, to stop castling, it's a king move. So the king would move to this square here, c8, and it does not pass through check on any of those three squares, so therefore it's a safe, valid maneuver, even though I'd be controlling that diagonal. So it wouldn't actually prevent my opponent from castling. Now what it would have done is if my opponent did castle, it would weaken their f7 pawn. I'm debating on initiating, just start pushing this f-pawn. But you know what? Stick to the rules. We should always just develop whenever possible. Just develop whenever possible. Let's go ahead and get our other pieces into the game. Now notice nobody is actually controlling the center of the board, right? So that is something we can keep an eye on. Maybe we want to try to do that. Maybe instead of our, maybe our outside rook, normally in these positions, because we've given up that c pawn, right? Because we've traded away that c pawn, we now have an open file for our rook. And that's definitely something we can look at doing, right? Getting our rook onto the open c file. Now my opponent has 2 attackers, but I have 2 defenders, so I'm not too worried just yet. The other option would be to basically force a bishop trade, but I don't really want to do that just yet. Let's leave the bishops on the board for now, temporarily. You know, we could always do something like this even, and bring this pawn up, and get a 3, you know, this is our isolated queen's pawn, right? We could look at maybe we do that with the knight even, to try to un-isolate that pawn. That might be a possibility, but that's a lot of sequence of moves. So the next question is, do we... Okay, good. So my opponent has castled now. I would love to have a rook here, which means I can't push this pawn, which means I really need to dislodge this bishop. Putting the bishop here would force the bishop trade. Let's just go ahead and develop. All right, there's nothing wrong with just developing. We'll stick our 2 rooks on the 2 open files. Semi-open, right? They're not exactly open yet. I'm just debating if I want a rook on... If I want my rooks on E and D, or if I want them on C and D. Because my opponent has limited where the queen could go. I think we just stick with the plan, right? Stick with the plan. The plan says you put the rook on the open C file. And that's what we're going to do. Now, it's not, like I said, it's not open. It's semi-open. Now, the queen on the second row is usually used to help defend the fianchettoed bishops, which means this pawn has to go somewhere. And if this pawn is going somewhere, I kind of want my other rook here. Now that my opponent's castled, my queen sitting here undefended looks a little meh. Remember, one of the principles that we always fall back on is no matter what's happening, defend, defend, defend. Okay, so I think I'm going to trade off this knight. See what my opponent does. If he takes with the queen, then the rook comes to d1. So he's taking with a pawn. So that almost certainly means... I gotta be careful, though. Gotta get rid of this bishop now. Yep, that's exactly what I was afraid of. There's a couple options, obviously. Let's keep it active as much as we can. Now if my opponent takes, I want to get my, I'll take back with the pawn. I doubt my opponent's going to take, though. Looking at it here, I doubt my opponent's actually going to take. Well, first we're going to go with danger zones, right? If my opponent takes here, this is checkmate. So we'll sweeten the pot. There we go. And now we can move this rook. The question is, where do we want to move it? We got to remember that our queen could come under fire. So let's go ahead and put this rook somewhere. Let's just offer a rook trade real quick. I'm going to pre-move this. Now, if my opponent doesn't take, you best believe I am capturing here, force the queen off, and then I pick up a free knight. So my opponent has to capture. No, that's not true. They don't have to capture, right? They could make for another developing move of some kind. But I think when they look at their position, they'll realize the knight is under defended, is only defended by their queen. Now that is defended, so I can't do anything about that. But we can... Now obviously we're not dropping it back and putting ourselves at a fork. But I would like to keep this tension somehow. I'm not in love with this queen move at all. Straight back? Yeah, let's go straight back. Now, I was thinking of something else, but I was now blocking my F pawn, so I'm not in love with it. If the knight moves and I have access to here, and I can pick up a pawn. No, I can't pick up a pawn because he's got it defended twice. Now, I'm wondering if I could get some kind of infiltration here. Sacrifice? He takes. No, because he would just take with the queen. He's just going to rotate the knight back. Do I take and allow him to take here? That's defended. Let's go for it. Ah, no. Whoops. Whoops, whoops, whoops. I forgot that this is defended. All right. Whoops. I keep losing track of my opponent's queen. Now my opponent's going to have to bring the queen here in order to keep an eye on the knight. And then I'll take the pawn. Now I can't take the pawn because the knight's defended still. No, damn. I was thinking I might have some kind of check, but he can just pick up with the queen, because his queen would be undefended at that point. So I don't really have any good discoveries. I gotta be real careful of something like this causing me to lose my rook. In that case, I would probably... I can't do anything about it. No, I've lost a rook here. This is... No, because I can take here and still defend. I'm okay. Yeah. I can take here. And now we are approaching our opponent's position. Tried to catch that one. And I wish I had access to this, but I don't because the knight. I do have access to here. Notice, though, that that could drop the rook. I have to be real careful on this turn of events here. Check. The opponent's king can't go here or here or here. That's checkmate. No, my opponent has to block. Excuse me. Sorry about that. You could really hear my throat struggling right now. So unfortunately, this pushing of the outside pawn really caused a problem for my opponent, but I still think that we are in good shape here. Check. I gotta think this through for a second. Check. The rook is pinned, so he has to take with the queen. I take, and all of a sudden the position falls apart. So I think this is it. I'm going to pick up here. I'm just looking to see if there's a way that I can finish this off. I can't really see anything off the bat. This comes with check. My opponent's going to have to come forward. This is covered. There's really not too much here by The only thing I have to worry about would be something like this. Let me see if there's a way that I can put together some kind of mating net. I'm just trying to find an easier mate here. Really struggling with the throat, guys. I'm sorry about that. Just eliminate any possibilities of issues. And then we go with something like... All right, how do we finish this off? Right. I have to watch the time. But now this is an immediate threat of checkmate. GG, well played to my opponent. So that's that. We get the win. So it took us a while, but we got there in the end. Let's just take a quick look at the analysis. The real win back here, the real win back here was all the way back here getting... where was it? Queen captures right here. So my opponent, with this pawn push, fantastic move by my opponent. In any other case, this would have been a huge win by my opponent, forcing me to move my queen. Notice this is covered. The fact of the matter, though, is he unfortunately undefended that, which allowed me to cover the rook. So, huge win by my opponent, right up until this moment, and I almost tossed the game. So let's take a look at this. This turns out to be a true Reti, and this is here. You can see how it's been a while since I played on the PC interface. I'm not used to where the buttons are anymore. But yeah, this is the true Reti opening. And you'll see that the most common responses are just to immediately defend the pawn, push past, or capture. Capture's down here on number 4. Surprisingly, not a lot of games in the true Reti. My opponent captured, and you could see that a lot of times White's position here is just to go for the center, just like it was a traditional e4 game. You push the center pawn, you bring the rook over. You don't worry about this guy at all. If he ever pushes it, then you can just grab it with any number of pawns. You can grab it with the knight. One of the other plans is simply rotate your knight up here. Now you're thinking, oh, but knights on the rim are dim, knights on the edge are dead. Yeah, but this is only a temporary stopping point. If at some point in time your opponent, say, defends, well, not that way because that drops this pawn, but if they were to defend, let's say something like this knight can happily come over here to c2, where it can then start controlling these squares and help support the center that way. So you can remaneuver this knight and still have access to a lot of things. And notice this pawn is still not going anywhere because at any point he pushes, you've got tons of pawns to pick it back up. The other option is this queen a4 check. It's just a very aggressive, and I don't see the need for it that early. I just think that's a lot of work for to grab a pawn. And in fact, I'll be honest with you, I'm not even happy with me grabbing the pawn as early as I did. Yeah, and you can see here, the engine says, well, I guess the engine does say go ahead and capture it, but there's no real need to capture this pawn right now at all. You can just let it sit there. The only thing this pawn is doing is it's stopping you from playing your d pawn. That's really the only thing this pawn is doing. And if you push the the B pawn, that's fine, because you can make this trade and open up your outside rook, and now you've got, yes, okay, you have an isolated B pawn, which kind of sucks. You've opened up 2 of your files, but they're on the queen side, so it's not too much of a danger for you. You're the one that's going to be using them. Your king side, you're going to be castling king side, so these lanes that you've opened are not a danger to you, but they are going to give you access to your opponent's position. So just something to think about. In this case, I don't know that I would actually fianchetto the bishop. I might even put it over here on a3. I might even stick it up here and immediately put pressure on this a7 pawn. That's an option as well. But in the ready, there's really no need to go after this pawn immediately. I did because I honestly didn't think my opponent would immediately grab the knight. Notice this works because I never pushed the e-pawn. If I had pushed the e-pawn, this could have been not something I'd be in love with. But in fact, the engine prefers grabbing with the G pawn and just immediately putting pressure this way. Yeah, I'm not. That's a plan. That's not my plan, but that's a plan. And you notice throughout the game, this pawn never got pushed. I was going to use it to bust open the position this way, but it never became a necessity. And you can see, even in this, the engine evaluates that black has a slight advantage, has at least equalized the opening advantage. Yeah, forcing me to move my queen, I don't see a problem with either place. Yeah, and sure enough, the engine's saying, go ahead and start pushing that pawn because of this. While the king is in the center, start pushing and busting open the center. Once the king is moved away from the center, then that's not so strong anymore. And so I slow rolled it by pushing another pawn. My opponent was able to get his development, get castled, and now there's no more risk. I was honestly trying to figure out a way if I could get something like this. Maybe my queen up here somehow, so that I could put double pressure along this knight and possibly along this bishop as well. But I just couldn't see it immediately, and then yeah, just developing. The engine says get the rook under, yeah. Or push that f-pawn. Yeah, I just slow rolled it a little too much, but you know what? I was okay with it. This was a developing plan. We wanted to continue developing. Yeah, it still wants the rook on d1, and I missed my opportunity for that. Like I said, if my opponent had taken with the queen, I mean, that immediately begs for this. And then, yeah, I should have spotted that the rook was coming over and got myself in a position to do something more with my queen, but oh well. But we kept it very even, right? Yeah, my opponent should have grabbed here. Ah, change the move order. Because this, and then if you have this trade, now let's say your opponent does something like they come back or whatever. This, all of a sudden, becomes a serious threat. Ah, the engine's saying bring the bishop all the way back to defend, checkmate that way. That way this rook up. Alright, this rook up here could never happen. Now, it's not going to happen right away, but, you know, if your opponent hadn't traded or something, right, like we talked about previously, if your opponent hasn't traded, then I can grab here, force the queen over, and then capture that way. But yeah, it would have taken a little more setup. Okay, would have taken a little too much setup, so I wouldn't worry about that. Yeah. And we have a slight advantage, very slight, again, 1 point something, very slight advantage, not much to talk about, a very even game at this point in time. Boy, I saw this, but I didn't like, because what about that? I don't get it at all. You're giving away. Oh, because that comes with check. because they've moved the f-pawn, this comes with check, forces the king to move, and then you can get the bishop out of the way. Interesting, okay. Yeah, I saw the fork. I saw the fork was covered in a million different ways. I just didn't see that moving the queen came with check, so, okay. Yeah, again, I wasn't happy with this queen move because it blocked in that f-pawn, which wasn't going anywhere anyway, it looks like. And wow, the engine says I have a massive advantage here. Somehow. Let's see if we can follow this. Bishop h3. Queen, the king has to move. Oh, because if the bishop gets here, you're going to start the king hunt. I don't see it. It doesn't go far enough for me to recognize. Bishop to, it wants the bishop to remaneuver is what it wants. It really wants the bishop to remaneuver somehow. Yeah, this could have been a disaster for me. Could have been a real disaster. Right. What? Oh, drops the rook. Yeah, okay, okay, okay. So let's say I made a dumb move here, then yeah. Now I've dropped the rook because that pawn is defended. So it could have been easy. It could have been very easy for me to miss that. But unfortunately, I got lucky. I didn't notice that wasn't covered. You heard me talk about it in game at the time that it happened, and yeah, this just becomes an overwhelming, massive advantage. It's just a pawn. It's just a pawn directly in front of the opponent's king, and now I have 3 heavy hitter pieces all moving in for the kill. The king is boxed in. Anything, yeah, immediate force checkmate. I mean, look at this. This is almost unholdable. Yeah, and then it just becomes immediate. So the engine says go ahead and grab here. Oh, right, because then you got that. Yeah, yeah, I didn't think about that. I was thinking, well, duh, why would anybody do this? I mean, it's still a rook up, but this seemed much better. And I should have, yeah, there's the move. Force the king back. Nope, not that. I don't know. Yeah, I had checkmate in 4. It all boiled down to this. So I should have taken. There you go, everybody. There you go. Learn your checkmate patterns. Because yeah, it's the same idea, except instead of having the rook in the way I did it, it allowed my opponent an escape square. And then I had no follow-up. I mean, yeah, I could still win material, but I mean, it's still winning. I mean, at this point in time, it's still winning almost no matter what. A queen versus no queen. I mean, come on. Even an idiot like me can win these, right? Right? So, all right. So we could have done. We could have checkmated a lot faster here, and then this just became cleanup. My opponent was definitely played well to try to stall it out, but I mean, there really was no. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to get in here. And I mean, this was just me being an a-hole and not trusting myself and just going for the cleanup. Yeah. we got the win, but oh well. But if we go back to the very beginning, this was a reti. I'm trying this c4 reti. I'm not good at it. It puts me in positions that I'm not comfortable with, but I'm trying to learn it. I'm going to keep playing a few more. If you look at my history, I've played a few of these. I'm going to keep trying to play a few more to try to get this idea a little bit better. It's a strong position because you immediately are offering one of two things. Either control of the center. If your opponent overextends, great. If your opponent defends, fine, then we can go into grabbing the whole center. Or if in this case they capture, either we're controlling the center or we're going to basically open up the C file for our rook. And that's the plan. So I'm trying to get better at it, as opposed to the normal way I would play is I would just ignore that and play a... well, not that. Something like this. A very King's Indian style. Yeah, a King's Indian style game. Normally I would play either a King's Indian style game, or I would even play what's known as a Catalan, which, let's see, if it starts off with a queen's pawn, and then into something like this. Is that the Catalan? That's not exactly the move order for the Catalan. I don't remember the exact move order for the Catalan. Do you have to do the queen's pawn first? See, this is why I don't have, I'll never have great recall because of these kind of specific things. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so yeah, it's the queen's gambit with the fianchettoed bishop. That's the Catalan opening. So this is what I started playing was the Catalan, and then I started looking for a double fianchetto Catalan to have both bishops controlling the long diagonals, which then said, let me change the move order to basically allow myself to go into this fianchetto whenever I want, because sometimes some lines of the Queen's Gambit, if they accept it, you can end up in something like this where you don't get the opportunity to fianchetto the bishop, which is still fine. Don't get me wrong, it's still fine. But I wanted to learn to play with this fianchetto bishop. I wanted to get some games in that way. So that's kind of how I started playing, was forcing this move order to allow me the opportunity that I could force the fianchetto whatever my opponent plays. And then this has led me to the reti, and the reti has led me into trying this, the actual reti, the c4 opening. And it's interesting. I know it has its merit and I know it's powerful, but I'm not there yet, but I'm still practicing it. There's a lot of subtleties to things that I don't know, like yeah, I mean, you just leave this alone, forget it. You're allowing your opponent to grab the full center, but like I said, we can find ways to attack that. You know, we can even push, yeah, the king's pawn, always play the king's pawn breaker, and then at some point in time, we'll do like a true King's Indian. We'll push our f-pawn and blow the position up. Something like that. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The game that we played was a true reti, and it shows you how fun these games can be, how weird and wild and flexible, and you do have to be prepared because nothing is ever as easy. Yeah, this seems like it would have been a fun move. Nothing is ever the same when you play a reti. Because it's so flexible, you have to be prepared to flex because stuff is going to change. Anyway, this is a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Talk to you later. Bye.